What happens when a marriage, once full of love, begins to crumble under the weight of betrayal and unspoken truths? In this gripping journey of love, loss, and redemption, one woman must decide if she can truly forgive the man who shattered her trust, or if it's time to walk away for good. Will they find a way back to each other, or is this the end of the road? Stay with us until the end for a shocking twist you won't see coming. The air was thick with the scent of fresh roses, and the sound of clinking glasses echoed softly. The grand hall was bathed in golden light, its chandeliers casting long shadows on the marble floor. Guests in elegant gowns and sharp suits mingled, laughing, chatting, their voices blending with the soft hum of a string quartet. I stood by the doorway, nervously adjusting my dress, waiting for the moment when I would finally step into the spotlight. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but something in the air felt wrong. Suddenly, I heard a voice I had learned to dread. It was Sarah, my husband's secretary, and she was speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She is nothing but a parasite," she said, her words sharp as knives. The crowd fell silent. A cold chill ran down my spine. I turned to look at my husband, who had been standing beside me just moments before. His face was red with anger. His hands clenched at his sides. The veins in his neck pulsed with tension. "I cannot believe you," he snapped, his voice trembling with fury. His eyes burned into me, and for a moment, I thought the world might collapse around us. I felt the blood drain from my face. Every part of me wanted to run, but I stood frozen, a prisoner in the spotlight. Then, the unimaginable happened. He looked at me, his gaze hardening. "Apologize," he ordered. "Get down on your knees and apologize to Sarah." I felt my stomach twist. My heart raced, and for a second, I thought I might suffocate. The room seemed to close in around me. The laughter from before was now a distant memory, replaced by the deafening silence that swallowed us whole. I hesitated. Could this be real? Was this really happening? The seconds dragged on like hours. I could feel every eye in the room on me, the weight of their judgment pressing down on my shoulders. The sound of my breathing was the only thing I could hear now. The floor beneath me felt as though it might give way. But still, I stayed where I was, staring at my husband with wide eyes, waiting for the impossible to sink in. His gaze didn't soften. It hardened even more. His eyes were filled with something I had never seen before. Contempt. The space between us seemed to stretch, growing wider with every second. I could feel my knees trembling, my hands shaking uncontrollably. But there was no escaping this moment. I had no choice. I lowered myself slowly to the ground, each inch of movement a reminder of how small I had become in that moment. The cold marble floor pressed against my knees, the sting of it a sharp contrast to the warmth of the room. I could barely breathe as I looked up at Sarah, her face full of smug satisfaction. She had won. She always won. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the silence that hung thick in the air. But no one seemed to hear. The weight of the room crushed me. I felt utterly insignificant. Sarah smiled, her eyes gleaming with triumph. The humiliation burned deeper than anything physical. And still, my husband stood there, not a hint of remorse on his face. He didn't look at me the same way anymore. I was no longer his partner. I was a problem, something to be swept away. The seconds stretched on, and I could feel the eyes of the guests burning into my soul. They didn't say a word, but I could feel their judgment, their quiet whispers echoing in my ears. Was this really happening? Had I really become this invisible in my own life? Finally, he spoke again, his voice softer now, but the words still cut through me. "Get up," he said. "Enough of this. Let's move on." I rose to my feet, but the world around me felt different. The sparkle of the chandelier, the laughter, the clinking of glasses. It all seemed so far away. Nothing felt real anymore. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just about a fight, or an embarrassing moment. It was about control. About power. And I had none. I stood there, frozen, in the middle of the grand hall, unable to shake the feeling that something had broken inside me. The guests were moving again, their voices no longer distant, but the world felt colder than before. The laughter that had once filled the room now seemed mocking, as if it were an echo from another life. I tried to regain my composure. I tried to smile, to act as though nothing had happened. But the truth was, everything had changed. The eyes of the guests lingered on me, as if they too could feel the shift in the air. They didn't look at me with sympathy. They looked at me with pity. And that pity made my stomach churn. Sarah's words were still echoing in my mind, repeating themselves like a cruel mantra. Parasite. The word stung more than I ever could have imagined. It was an insult, a reflection of everything I had feared. And now, I could feel its weight dragging me down. Had she truly believed it? Had my husband believed it too? The thought made my head spin. "Are you all right?" A voice broke through my haze. It was Marie, a friend of mine from college, who had come to the wedding with her husband. She placed a gentle hand on my arm, her touch warm, but I couldn't bring myself to meet her eyes. I could barely lift my gaze to look at anyone. "I'm fine," I said, my voice thin, trying to keep it together, but even to my own ears, it sounded hollow. "You don't seem fine," Marie said softly. I could hear the concern in her voice, but I didn't have the strength to explain. How could I tell her the truth? That everything I thought I knew about my marriage, about my life, had just crumbled before me? I gave a small, forced smile, not trusting myself to speak. Marie didn't press me further, but I could feel the weight of her gaze as she walked away. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. The wedding cake was cut. The first dance was performed. But none of it seemed real. Each moment felt like it was happening to someone else, as if I were watching from a distance. My husband, Chris, had barely spoken to me since the incident. He was surrounded by guests, his usual charming self, laughing and making small talk. But when he glanced at me, there was no warmth in his eyes, only a coldness, an indifference that felt like a knife in my chest. I kept my distance, not knowing what to do, how to fix what had been shattered. And then, just as the night was winding down, he approached me. "Can we talk?" His voice was low, almost too calm. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. I followed him outside, to the balcony that overlooked the garden. The night air was cool against my skin, and for a moment, I thought I might be able to breathe again. Chris leaned against the railing, his hands tucked into his pockets. He didn't look at me at first. His gaze focused on the stars above. The silence between us stretched, making the tension unbearable. "I don't know what happened in there," he finally said, his voice tight. I never thought Sarah would say something like that. She crossed a line. I nodded again, but my throat was dry. I wanted to scream, to ask him what he was thinking, but the words wouldn't come. What had he meant by crossed a line? Was he apologizing for her words, or for his own? "You should have stood up for me," I whispered, my voice barely audible in the still night air. He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine, as though trying to understand. I didn't know what to do, he admitted, his voice rough. I was shocked. I never thought she'd. "No," I cut him off, the anger bubbling up inside me now. "It's not about Sarah. It's about you. Why didn't you defend me? Why did you let her humiliate me in front of everyone?" Chris looked away, his jaw tightening. "I'm sorry," he said finally, but the apology felt empty, as if it was a mere formality, a way to get out of this uncomfortable conversation. I didn't want to make a scene. It would have caused more trouble. You know how she is. She's been working for me for years. And that makes it okay?" I demanded, my voice rising. But the words felt hollow, as if I were speaking through a fog. "No," he said quietly. No, it doesn't. I shouldn't have let her do that. But I didn't think. You didn't think. I repeated bitterly. You didn't think when you married me. And you certainly didn't think when you let her walk all over me. You never think. You just react. I could see the pain in his eyes now. The guilt. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to undo what had happened. It wasn't enough to fix the wound that had been cut so deep inside me. I'm sorry, he said again, his voice breaking. I'll talk to Sarah tomorrow. I'll set things straight. But you need to understand. She's difficult to deal with. I took a step back, feeling the distance between us grow even wider. The words sounded empty, like a promise I had heard too many times before. Sarah's behavior wasn't the problem. It was everything else. The way he had treated me. The way he had allowed her to belittle me without a second thought. You don't get it, do you? I whispered, my heart heavy. You don't understand what you've done. Chris stood there, silent. He didn't know what to say, and for once, I didn't have the energy to say anything more. It felt pointless. This wasn't a conversation we could fix with words. The damage was already done. I turned away from Chris, my heart heavy with the weight of everything that had transpired. The night seemed colder now, the chill of the air mirroring the coldness I felt inside. I didn't want to be near him anymore. I didn't want to stand there, pretending that everything could be fixed with a few empty apologies. It was too much. I had already given so much to this marriage. And for what? To be humiliated on the one day that was supposed to be about us? The wind picked up, ruffling my hair and making the thin fabric of my dress cling to my skin. I didn't care. I wasn't cold from the weather. I was cold from the realization that I had been invisible in my own life. Chris said nothing as I walked away. He didn't try to stop me, didn't even call my name. I wasn't sure if he even cared to. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I was afraid of what I might see in his eyes. Apologies, regret. I didn't know if I could trust them anymore. The sound of the party was faint in the background as I walked down the garden path, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. The flowers that lined the edges of the garden were beginning to wilt, their petals hanging limp, as if they too felt the weight of the evening. The world around me seemed muted, as if everything had turned gray. I could still hear the faint strains of the music, but it was distant, like a memory fading away. I didn't know where I was going. I just kept walking, not caring about the path, not caring about the consequences. All I knew was that I needed space. I needed to breathe without the suffocating pressure of the world watching me, of my husband's gaze, of Sarah's cutting words. My thoughts raced, each one more jumbled than the last. The humiliation I had felt in that room, the look in Chris's eyes, the way he had forced me to kneel and apologize. It all felt like a nightmare. I had always known that our marriage wasn't perfect. There had been cracks, small moments where I felt overlooked or dismissed. But I had never imagined this. Not in a million years. I stopped walking for a moment, standing at the edge of the garden, looking out into the vast emptiness of the night. The stars above twinkled softly, but even they seemed distant, unreachable. I closed my eyes, allowing the cool breeze to wash over me, but it didn't calm the storm inside. What had I become? A parasite, as Sarah had so cruelly put it. Was that how everyone saw me? Had I truly become a burden to the man I had married? The man I had loved so deeply, so blindly? I shook my head, unable to find any answers. The silence was deafening, and the only sound I could hear was the pounding of my heart in my chest. And then I heard footsteps behind me. A voice called my name, soft and hesitant. Emily. I froze. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. It was Chris. His voice was strained, and there was something in the way he said my name, something that made my chest tighten. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to face him again. I didn't want to hear more excuses, more apologies that wouldn't fix anything. But I felt the pull of his presence, the weight of his regret. Against my better judgment, I slowly turned to face him. He was standing a few feet away, his hands in his pockets, his posture tense. His eyes were softer now, not as hard as they had been earlier, but there was still something distant about him. It was as if the space between us had grown so vast that no words could close it. "I'm sorry," he said again, his voice low. "I never should have let her say that. I never should have treated you that way." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that the man standing before me was the one I had married. The man who had once promised me that he would always have my back, that we would face everything together. But the truth was, I couldn't trust him anymore. Not after tonight. Not after everything that had happened. "You can't just apologize, Chris," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You can't just say, sorry, and expect everything to go back to normal. What happened today? It changed everything. You changed everything." He took a step toward me, his face etched with guilt. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I need you to understand. This wasn't how I wanted things to go. I never meant for you to feel like this. I never meant for Sarah to do that to you." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. But the hurt was too much to bear. "I've been standing by you for years, Chris. I've been your partner. And today, you made me feel like nothing. Like I was nothing more than a burden. A parasite, as Sarah said." The words stung as they left my mouth. But they were the truth. And I needed him to hear it. I needed him to understand what he had done. "I never saw you that way," he said, his voice trembling. "But I see now how I've made you feel. And for that, I'm truly sorry." I shook my head. "You keep saying that, but it's not enough." "I don't think it's enough anymore." His eyes widened, and for the first time that night, he seemed to understand the gravity of what he had done. I don't know what to say. I love you, Emily. I don't want to lose you." I took a step back, feeling the distance between us grow once again. "I don't know if I can stay, Chris. I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's fine, when it's not. When you've shown me that you don't truly see me. Not the way you used to." I felt tears welling in my eyes, but I wiped them away quickly, not wanting to show any more vulnerability. "I need time. I need to figure out what I want, what I deserve. I can't do this right now." Chris looked at me, his face filled with pain and regret. But he didn't say anything more. There was nothing left to say. We had said it all, and yet it felt like we had said nothing at all. I turned away from him, walking back toward the house. But this time, I didn't feel like the same woman who had walked into that wedding. I didn't feel like the same woman who had loved him. I felt lost. I felt empty. And as I stepped back into the warm glow of the wedding reception, I realized that I might never find my way back. The warm glow of the reception hall felt like an alien world when I re-entered, the laughter and chatter continuing as if nothing had happened. The contrast between the chaos of the celebration and the quiet turmoil inside me was suffocating. I felt disconnected from everything, as though I were a ghost among the living, moving through a dream I couldn't wake from. The guests were still dancing, still sipping their drinks, but I wasn't there with them. I wasn't a part of this moment anymore. My thoughts were too heavy, too tangled in confusion and hurt. I made my way to the farthest corner of the room, hoping to blend into the shadows, to disappear for a moment. My hand gripped the back of a chair, and I tried to steady myself. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Maybe some semblance of peace, or a moment to breathe without feeling suffocated by the weight of everything that had happened. The soft sounds of the band playing the waltz echoed in the background, but it felt like I was in a different world altogether. I barely registered the people around me, their voices a dull murmur that only added to the overwhelming silence in my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my thoughts. But they kept racing. Sarah's voice. Chris's empty apologies. The coldness of his gaze. I had no answers. I had no clarity. What had we become? What was left of the love we had once shared? I glanced toward the center of the room, where Chris was now standing with Sarah, their heads close together as they whispered. I saw the way Sarah's eyes flickered toward me, a look of smug satisfaction on her face, as if she had won, as if she had finally triumphed over me. It was like a slap to the face, a reminder that I was nothing in their eyes, just a mere inconvenience to be dealt with. I looked away, my heart heavy with the bitter sting of betrayal. I could feel the tears welling up again, but I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of them. Not in front of all these people who had no idea what was really happening. I heard footsteps behind me and froze. A chill ran through my body as I turned, half expecting it to be Chris. But it wasn't him. It was Marie again, her expression concerned but gentle. "Emily, are you okay?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, as if she knew something was wrong but wasn't sure how to ask. She stepped closer, her eyes searching my face for an answer I didn't know how to give. "I'm fine," I said quickly, forcing a smile. But it was weak, barely a shadow of the confidence I had once worn so easily. "I just need a moment." Marie didn't buy it. She tilted her head, her eyes narrowing slightly. "No, you're not fine. I can see it in your face, Emily. What happened back there? I saw the way he looked at you. It's like he didn't even care." I swallowed hard, feeling the familiar sting in my throat. Marie had always been a friend, someone I could confide in. But tonight, I wasn't sure I had the strength to share what I was feeling. I didn't know where to start. "It's complicated," I said quietly, my voice cracking as I spoke. "Everything's just changed." Marie looked at me for a long moment, her gaze softening. "You don't have to explain right now, but I want you to know. You're not alone in this. You deserve more than what he's giving you. Emily, don't let anyone make you feel small." I looked at her, her words sinking in slowly, like a balm to my wounded heart. I had always known that I deserved better, but hearing it from someone else, someone who saw the truth when I couldn't, felt like a small spark of hope. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this." Marie placed a hand on my arm, her grip firm and reassuring. "You don't have to fix anything right now. Take your time. But don't let him or anyone else make you feel like you don't matter. You matter, Emily." I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I had always been strong, always been the one who held everything together. But tonight, I felt shattered, broken in a way I couldn't mend. Marie stayed with me for a few more minutes, talking softly, her presence comforting. But eventually, she had to leave to join her husband, leaving me alone again. But this time, the emptiness felt a little less suffocating. I wasn't sure what the future held. But for the first time that night, I realized that I didn't have to have all the answers right away. The night stretched on, but I no longer felt like I was trapped in a dream I couldn't wake from. I had been holding on to the idea of my marriage, clinging to the hope that things would get better. But now, I understood that hope was not enough. Not when the foundation had cracked beyond repair. I looked around the room one last time. Chris was still talking to Sarah, his back turned to me. I felt a flicker of something. Maybe it was anger. Maybe it was sorrow. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't live in this false world anymore. I turned and made my way to the exit, my steps slow but deliberate. I didn't care what anyone thought, or if they noticed I was leaving. All I cared about was the weight that had been lifted from my shoulders, even if just a little. The cool night air greeted me as I stepped outside, the world bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I breathed deeply, feeling the tension in my body begin to ease. I wasn't sure where I was going, But for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt freed. I walked away from the wedding, my footsteps steady but my mind far from clear. The cool air wrapped around me like a comfort, as though the night was offering me a small reprieve from the storm within. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe. A shallow breath, but still it was something. The weight in my chest, that gnawing pain, hadn't disappeared, but it was less overwhelming. The world outside the reception hall felt surreal, like an oasis of calm after the chaos. I had no destination in mind, no plans for what came next. I just knew I needed distance. I needed time. My mind kept drifting back to Chris, to his apology, to the coldness in his eyes. Had he really understood? Or was it just another act to pacify me, to keep the peace for appearances? I couldn't tell anymore. I found myself walking aimlessly, my heels clicking softly on the sidewalk, the sound echoing in the empty street. I had no direction, but somehow I ended up at the park near our house, a place that had always been peaceful for me. A small pond, surrounded by weeping willows, stood like a still mirror under the dim light of the moon. I sat on one of the benches, the cool wood pressing against my back, the night air carrying the faint scent of damp earth and grass. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to find some semblance of peace, but it was fleeting. The hurt, the anger, the betrayal, they all swirled within me, churning like a storm that refused to calm. I tried to think of what to do next, but the answer didn't come easily. Was there a way forward? Could things ever go back to how they were before? I wasn't sure anymore. The sound of footsteps broke my thoughts, and I turned my head to see someone approaching, their figure illuminated by the dim streetlights. I squinted, trying to make out who it was. It was Marie. She had found me. Her face was kind, but there was a certain urgency in her steps as she walked over to the bench. "Emily," she said softly, sitting down beside me. "I've been looking for you. You didn't tell me you were leaving the party." I couldn't help but smile weakly. I needed to get away for a bit. It was all too much. "I understand," Marie replied, her voice steady. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay." I looked at her, grateful for her concern, but also feeling a deep sadness I hadn't fully realized until now. "I don't know what's going on anymore, Marie. Everything feels broken." She didn't say anything at first, just sat beside me, her presence comforting, silent but full of understanding. After a moment, she spoke again, her voice soft but firm. "Emily, I don't know what happened between you two, but I can see the toll it's taking on you. You deserve so much more than to feel like this. You're a strong, amazing person, and you don't have to stay in a relationship that makes you feel invisible." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had always known, deep down, that I deserved better, but hearing it from someone else, especially someone who cared, felt like a wake-up call. I looked at Marie, really looked at her, and for the first time, I wasn't just numb. I could feel something stirring inside me, a sense of purpose, a flicker of strength I had forgotten about. "I don't know what to do," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "But I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not." Marie nodded, her expression full of empathy. "You don't have to do it alone, Emily. You have options. You can find your way out of this, even if it feels impossible right now." I looked out at the pond, the moonlight shimmering on the water surface, and for a moment, I felt a small glimmer of hope. Maybe I could find my way out. Maybe things didn't have to stay broken forever. But it wouldn't be easy. It would take time. It would take strength. And most of all, it would take courage. "You're right," I said softly, more to myself than to her. "I need to figure this out. I need to take control again." Marie smiled gently, her hand resting on mine. "I'm proud of you, Emily. I know this is hard, but I believe you can do it." I squeezed her hand, feeling the support and love in her touch. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could stand up for myself. The silence stretched between us, comfortable now, and for the first time that evening, I felt a sense of peace settling over me. The road ahead would be uncertain, but I wasn't walking it alone, and that made all the difference. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent a lot of time alone, processing everything that had happened. The wedding, Chris's betrayal, the words that cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I reached out to a therapist, someone I could talk to about everything. The sessions weren't easy, but they gave me clarity. They helped me understand that I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. I had every right to be hurt, and I had every right to demand better. Meanwhile, Chris didn't make any attempts to reach out. The silence between us grew louder with each passing day. I wasn't sure if he even realized the weight of what had happened, or if he was simply too caught up in his own world to care. The days turned into weeks, and I began to rebuild. I started focusing on my own well-being, filling my time with activities that brought me joy. I rediscovered hobbies I had put aside, things I used to love but had abandoned in the chaos of marriage. I found strength in being alone, strength I had forgotten I had. And then, one day, Chris came to see me. He stood in front of the door, looking like a man who had just woken from a long sleep. "Emily," he said quietly, his voice softer than it had been in weeks. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. About what I did." I stared at him, not knowing what to say. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this conversation. But he continued. "I was wrong, Emily. I've treated you terribly. And I've been selfish. I can't take back what I did. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. I understand if you can't forgive me. But I want to try. I don't want to lose you." The sincerity in his eyes was undeniable. But I wasn't sure if it was enough. "Not yet. I need time, Chris," I said, my voice steady but firm. "I need time to figure out what I want, and what's best for me." He nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as if a weight had been lifted. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'll give you the space you need. But know this, Emily. I'll be here if you decide you want to try again." I didn't say anything. I just watched him walk away. And for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of clarity. I wasn't sure where the future would take me, but I was no longer afraid. I was no longer trapped. The journey ahead would not be easy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could face it. I was no longer the woman who knelt in silence. I was no longer the woman who apologized for her existence. I was Emily, strong, independent, and ready to take control of her life again. The next chapter, rebuilding. Weeks passed. The days seemed to blend into one another, but I could feel something changing within me. The anger I had once felt was gradually replaced with something quieter, more resolute. I no longer felt like a victim. I wasn't someone who needed to apologize or beg for anyone's approval. I was learning to stand on my own again, and that was the most empowering feeling I had ever known. I had started going back to work, finding solace in the familiar rhythm of my job. I had always loved it. The challenge, the creativity, the satisfaction of knowing that I was good at what I did. And now, it felt like my job was the only thing that hadn't changed. It was my anchor. But even as I rebuilt the parts of my life that had been shattered, the question remained. What about Chris? What about us? I hadn't seen him in weeks. He hadn't called, hadn't texted, but there were moments when I would catch myself wondering if he was waiting for me to make the next move. The silence between us had become heavy, but at the same time, I didn't feel ready to reach out. In the back of my mind, I kept hearing his words, his apology, the sincerity in his voice. But was it enough? Could I truly forgive him? Could I trust him again? I spent a lot of time grappling with those questions. I talked to Marie, my therapist, even close friends, and each one of them had different perspectives. Some said I deserved better, that I should move on. Others said that relationships were about forgiveness, about finding a way to heal together. But what if healing together meant going backwards? What if we could never get back to where we once were? One night, I found myself standing by the window, staring out at the darkened street below. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a soft light on everything it touched. It was beautiful, but it only made me feel more alone. The weight of the decision I had to make pressed down on me, more than anything else. Should I let Chris back into my life? Could I really give him another chance? Suddenly, my phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was a message from him. Chris. Emily, I hope you're doing okay. I've been thinking a lot about us, and I just wanted to reach out. I understand if you don't want to talk, but I miss you. I miss what we had. I read the message several times, feeling the old stirrings of emotion rise up again. But it wasn't just the nostalgia I felt. It was the ache of the past that made me hesitate. I couldn't go back to who I was. But could I give him a chance to prove that he could change? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I couldn't let fear make this decision. I had to listen to what I truly wanted. I couldn't just let the past dictate my future. Emily, I've been thinking a lot too. I can't pretend everything is fine. But maybe we can talk. If you're really ready to listen, to understand, then maybe we can figure out where we go from here. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The reply came almost immediately. Chris, I'm ready. I'll come by tomorrow. We need to talk. The next day, I found myself standing by the door, heart racing, unsure of what would come next. I had no idea if this conversation would bring us closer together or push us further apart. But I couldn't keep running from it. I needed to face it, for my own peace of mind. When the doorbell rang, my breath caught in my throat. I opened the door to find Chris standing there, his posture stiff but his expression sincere. "Hi," he said softly. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. We stood in the living room for a long moment, both of us unsure of how to start. "I've been thinking a lot," Chris began, his voice hesitant. "About everything. About the way I treated you. About how I failed you." I crossed my arms, waiting for him to continue. But I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I was ready to hear what he had to say. "I never meant to hurt you, Emily," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you. I know I messed up, and I'm sorry, but I want to make things right. I want to work through this, if you're willing to give me the chance." I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the desire to believe him, but also the fear that if I trusted him again, it would only bring more hurt. What if this was just another empty promise? "I need to know that you truly understand what you did," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You can't just apologize and expect everything to be okay. I need to know that you're not just saying the words. I need to know that you see me, that you really understand what it means to be in this relationship with me." Chris nodded slowly, his eyes filled with emotion. "I do understand, and I know it will take time to rebuild your trust, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes." For the first time in a long while, I felt the smallest flicker of hope. But it was a cautious hope, the kind that needed time to grow. "I'm not ready to forgive you yet," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to try. I need you to prove that you can be the person you promised you'd be. I need to see that you can be that man for me, for us." Chris nodded again, his expression one of determination. "I will. I promise, Emily. I will show you every day that I can be that man." The next few months were filled with uncertainty. We took things slow, working through the damage, piece by piece. There were days when I doubted if we could ever truly rebuild. days when I wondered if I was just wasting my time. But there were also days when I saw glimpses of the man Chris used to be. The man I had loved. The man who made me feel like I mattered. It wasn't easy. And it wasn't perfect. But I had learned that healing wasn't a straight path. It was messy. It was painful. But it was also beautiful in its own way. I wasn't the same person I had been when I walked into that wedding. I had grown, learned, and become stronger in ways I never expected. And while the future was still uncertain, one thing was clear. I was no longer afraid to take control of my life. No matter what happened next, I knew I could handle it, because I had learned how to stand on my own. The struggle between the past and the future. Months passed, and life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. But there were days when the pain would hit unexpectedly, reminding me of everything that had come before. The small acts of betrayal that had chipped away at me, the quiet apologies that never seemed to be enough, and the time I had lost, feeling invisible in my own life. Yet, as much as I still struggled, I was no longer the woman I had been at that wedding. The woman who had knelt and apologized without question. The woman who had doubted her own worth. I had come a long way from that day, even if the road ahead still felt uncertain. Chris was trying, and I could see it. He was more attentive now, more present. He took time to listen to me, really listen, without brushing off my feelings or trying to justify his actions. He was working on the little things. The things I had begged him to notice before. The way I needed affection. The way I wanted us to spend more time together. The way I needed to feel valued beyond the surface. But there were moments when I still found myself questioning everything. Could I really trust him again? Could I let go of the hurt that had been planted so deeply in my heart? It was a battle, and at times, it felt like a war between the version of Chris I had fallen in love with and the man who had betrayed me. And then, there was the question that lingered in my mind. Did I still love him? Or had I simply held on to the memory of what we had once been? I wasn't sure. And that was the hardest part. The uncertainty. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation, Chris and I sat on the couch. The silence between us thick and heavy. We had been talking about the future. But I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. A nagging thought that wouldn't let me rest. What if we can't get past this? I said softly, breaking the silence. What if I can't forgive you fully? Chris looked at me. His eyes filled with concern. But also something else. A kind of vulnerability I had never seen before. I don't know what to say, Emily. I'm trying. I know I hurt you. And I can't change that. But I'm here now. I'll be here for as long as you need. I don't know if that's enough. I whispered, my heart aching with the truth of my words. I want to believe it is. I want to believe that we can make it through. But I'm not sure if I can ever go back to how things were. Chris's face softened, and he reached out, placing his hand on mine. I'm not asking you to go back to how things were, he said quietly. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, to build something new, something better. I stared at him for a long moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Could I rebuild with him? Could we create something new? Something that didn't carry the weight of the past? The truth was, I didn't know. But I couldn't let fear hold me back forever. I had learned that lesson too well over the past few months. Life was uncertain, and sometimes, the only way forward was to take a leap, even when you didn't know where it would lead. I need time, I said softly, squeezing his hand. I need time to figure out what I want, what we want. But I'm willing to try. He nodded, his expression full of relief. But there was something deeper in his eyes. A quiet understanding that this wasn't going to be easy. I'll wait. For as long as it takes. The search for closure. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, things began to change. We still had our moments of tension. But we were also learning how to communicate better. How to express our fears, our needs, without letting the past dictate our every move. I started to feel like myself again, not defined by my relationship with Chris, but as my own person. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and spent more time focusing on the things that brought me joy. I learned to love myself in ways I had forgotten how to do. Chris and I were growing, but we were growing in different ways. I could see that he was trying, really trying, but there were still moments when the distance between us felt too great. The scars, both his and mine, were still there, even if they were no longer as raw. One day, as I was walking through the park near our home, I ran into Marie. She was out for her usual jog, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, her face glowing from the exercise. "Emily," she called, waving at me as she jogged over. "Hey!" I greeted her, smiling warmly. She stopped in front of me, breathing slightly heavier from the run. "I've been meaning to check in with you," she said, wiping a hand across her forehead. "How are you? Really?" I hesitated for a moment, but then smiled. "I'm doing better. I'm figuring things out." Marie nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "I'm glad to hear that. You've been through so much, and I know it's not easy." "Yeah," I said softly, my thoughts drifting. "It's not. But I've learned a lot." Marie took a deep breath, her expression shifting slightly. "I know things with Chris have been complicated, but I want you to know, whatever you decide, I support you. I want you to be happy, Emily, and I want you to do what's best for you." Her words hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't telling me what to do. She wasn't offering advice. She was simply giving me permission to choose my own path, free from guilt or expectation. "Thank you, Marie," I said quietly, my throat tight. I think I'm starting to realize that I need to do what's best for me, even if that means letting go." She smiled warmly, putting a hand on my shoulder. "I think that's the most important thing, Emily. You deserve to be happy, and you deserve to have the life you want." The days that followed were filled with reflection, with deep conversations, and moments of clarity. I started to realize that I didn't need to rush into making a decision. I didn't need to choose between Chris and myself. I could be both. Someone who was learning to love again, and someone who was learning to love herself. And then, one day, while we were sitting on the couch together, Chris looked at me with a softness in his eyes. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but full of emotion, "I know it hasn't been easy, and I understand if you need more time. But I want you to know, no matter what happens, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of how far you've come, and I'll always love you, no matter what." I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words. It wasn't the apology I had once hoped for. It wasn't the magic fix I had longed for. But it was the truth, spoken plainly and without expectation. "I know, Chris," I said softly, smiling faintly, "and I'll always love you too." And with that, the chapter of uncertainty slowly began to close, and I realized that the journey I had started alone had brought me to a place of peace I never thought possible. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally learned how to be whole on my own. The awakening. As time went on, life began to feel more balanced. There were still moments of doubt, nights when I lay awake, thinking about the future, the choices I had to make. But I had come a long way from the woman who once felt trapped in a marriage that no longer served her. I started focusing more on myself, on my own growth and healing. There were days when I felt like a brand new person, like I was finally shedding the layers of hurt, resentment, and fear that had accumulated over the years. Chris and I were finding a new rhythm. It wasn't the same as before, and I didn't expect it to be. There was an unspoken understanding between us now, a recognition that things had to change, that we had to change. But I wasn't sure where that change would lead us. I wasn't sure if I could fully trust him again, or if I even wanted to go back to what we had before. The idea of rebuilding seemed impossible some days, and on others, it felt like a small but hopeful possibility. We had our good days, the quiet moments when we laughed together, when we shared our thoughts without fear of judgment. And we had our bad days, when the past resurfaced, when the weight of everything we had gone through threatened to pull us under. I often found myself thinking about my own journey. I had spent so much of my life waiting for someone else to validate me, to love me in the way I needed. But now, I was learning how to validate myself, how to love myself, not because of anyone else's approval, but because I finally understood that I was worthy of love just as I was. One night, as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset together, Chris turned to me with a thoughtful look on his face. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about everything we've been through, about how much I've messed up." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to make up for everything I did," he said, his voice full of regret. "But I do know this. I don't want to lose you, Emily. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right away. I just want you to know that I'm here, and I'm going to keep trying. Every day." I looked at him, his face soft in the fading light. "I know," I said quietly. "I know you're trying. But it's not just about trying, Chris. It's about showing up, day in and day out. It's about being the person I need you to be, not the person I thought you were." He nodded slowly, his eyes focused on mine with sincerity. "I understand," he said softly. I sat back in my chair, my mind drifting to the many things that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the long path to healing. "I've learned a lot too," I said, speaking more to myself than to him. "I've learned that I can't keep waiting for someone to fix me, to make things better. I have to do that for myself." Chris didn't respond immediately, but I could see the understanding in his eyes. He wasn't the same man he had been before, and neither was I. We had both changed, but that didn't mean we couldn't create something new together, something stronger, something more honest. The test of time. As the months passed, we continued to navigate the ups and downs of rebuilding. There were days when the weight of the past seemed unbearable, and moments when I doubted whether we were even on the right path. But we kept moving forward, learning, growing. Chris had started taking more initiative, planning small surprises for me, taking the time to listen when I needed to talk. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it felt different from before. Genuine, unhurried. One day, as I was leaving work, I noticed a small package waiting for me on my desk. It was wrapped in brown paper, with a small note attached. The note read, "I know I can't erase the past, but I hope this reminds you that I'm still here. For us. Always." I opened the package carefully, my heart beating faster. Inside, there was a simple but beautiful bracelet, a delicate silver chain with a small charm in the shape of a heart. Tears welled up in my eyes as I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the charm. It was such a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. It told me that Chris was still trying, still hoping, just as I was. I smiled, holding the bracelet close to my heart, and I knew, in that moment, that things weren't perfect, but they didn't have to be. What mattered was that we were still here, still fighting, still trying. That evening, when Chris came home, I showed him the bracelet, and he smiled, his eyes full of warmth. "I'm glad you liked it," he said softly. "I just wanted you to know that I'm not giving up on us." I slipped the bracelet onto my wrist, feeling its weight as a reminder of how far we had come, how far we still had to go. But in that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Maybe we wouldn't have the perfect love story, but we had something real, and that was enough. A new beginning. It's funny how life works, how it takes you through so many twists and turns, making you question everything along the way. But looking back, I realized that the hardest moments were the ones that led me to the person I am today. Stronger, wiser, and more confident than I ever thought possible. I had learned to trust myself again, to believe in my own strength, and to love myself, not because of anyone else, but because I finally understood my own worth. Chris and I were still learning, still growing, still figuring things out. But we were doing it together, and that, to me, was the most important thing. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what the future would bring. But we had each other, and that was enough to face whatever came next. Epilogue. Embracing the future. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden light over the horizon. Chris and I sat on the porch together, watching the world go by. The years had passed, and so much had changed, but the one thing that remained constant was our commitment to each other. We had built something new, something stronger, something that was ours. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I was no longer afraid. 'Cause now, I knew I had the strength to face it, no matter what. And as we sat there, side by side, watching the sky turn dark, I realized that the journey was never really about the destination. It was about the moments along the way, the lessons learned, and the love that had carried us through it all. I smiled, and Chris squeezed my hand. Whatever came next, we would face it together. And that was enough. The test of forgiveness. The days after our quiet evening together on the porch felt like a new chapter. We were no longer stuck in the past, tied to the mistakes and failures that had once seemed insurmountable. There was a quiet understanding between us, a realization that we didn't need to be perfect. We just needed to be present. As time passed, I found myself embracing more of the woman I had become. I was no longer the person who waited for approval. I was no longer the person who doubted her worth. Instead, I had found strength in my vulnerability, in my ability to face the unknown without fear of what it might bring. But just when I thought we were moving forward, life threw another challenge our way. It wasn't a dramatic, life-altering event, but it was a test of everything we had built together. It started with a simple conversation. Chris had been working late, and when he came home, he looked more exhausted than usual. I could see the strain in his eyes, but I didn't think much of it at first. We had been through so much. This was just another bump in the road. We were sitting at the kitchen table, the soft glow of the evening light spilling through the window. The quiet hum of the house was comforting, but there was a tension in the air that neither of us could ignore. "I've been thinking," Chris said suddenly, his voice low. "About us. About everything." I looked at him, waiting for him to continue. I could sense that there was something he wasn't saying, something important. "I think we need to take a step back," he said quietly, his words hitting me like a sudden storm. "We've been moving forward, but maybe we're rushing it. Maybe we need space to really understand what we want." I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he had just said. "Space," I echoed, my voice trembling. Chris nodded, his gaze not meeting mine. "I think it's important. I don't want to hurt you, but I think I need to figure out who I am. Outside of this, outside of us." The words stung. I had been through so much with him, and I thought we had finally found our way back to each other. The thought of taking a step back, of potentially unraveling everything we had worked so hard for, was unbearable. But at the same time, something inside me understood. I had learned so much about myself in the past few months, about my own strength, my own independence, and maybe this was the next step in our journey, to learn how to exist separately and still maintain the bond we had. "I don't know if I can do that," I said quietly, my voice soft with hurt. "I've been through so much, Chris. I can't just let go." Chris reached across the table, his hand hovering over mine but not quite touching it. I'm not asking you to let go completely. I just think we need to find ourselves before we can really find each other again. We've been trying to fix everything so quickly that maybe we've missed something. I need time to figure it out. And I don't want you to wait around for me if you need something more." I looked at him, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. It wasn't that I didn't understand. It was that I wasn't ready to accept it. "I don't know if I can live with that uncertainty," I whispered. "I've been living in the unknown for so long, and I thought we had a path forward together." "We do," he said softly. "We just need to find our own ways again, so we can come back stronger. But I don't want to hold you back if you need more than I can give right now." The room felt colder suddenly, the weight of his words settling around me like a blanket I couldn't shake off. I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know how to give him the space he needed when I felt like we were standing on the edge of something important, something beautiful that I was afraid to lose. The quiet pause. The next few days were a blur of emotions. Chris and I had decided to take some space, but neither of us knew what that really meant. We didn't talk much. We didn't argue. But there was a palpable silence that hung in the air between us. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was undeniable. We were both figuring things out, each lost in our own thoughts, wondering if this was the end of the journey we had begun, or simply another chapter in the story of us. During that time, I did a lot of thinking. I spent time alone, walking through the places I had once visited with Chris, remembering the moments we had shared. But I also spent time rediscovering myself, my own desires, my own needs. I knew that no matter what happened with Chris, I had to keep moving forward. I couldn't stop my life to wait for someone else to decide where they fit into IT. IT wasn't easy. There were days when I missed him, when I longed for his presence beside me. But there were also moments when I realized that I had come so far on my own, that I didn't need anyone to complete me. I was already whole. And then, just as I was starting to feel like I had found some peace in the silence, Chris came home one evening, his face more serious than usual. He looked at me, and for the first time in days, I saw clarity in his eyes. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "I don't want to lose you, Emily. I've been selfish, and I thought I needed space to figure myself out. But the truth is, I don't want space from you. I want to be with you. I want us to rebuild, to continue this journey together." I looked at him, my heart racing. His words were what I had been waiting to hear, but I wasn't sure if they were enough anymore. "Chris," I said softly, "we've come so far, but I don't know if I can just go back to how things were." He nodded, his face softening with understanding. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to choose me, to choose us, but in a way that's different from before, in a way that respects who we are now, not who we were." It was everything I needed to hear, but still, a part of me hesitated. I had learned so much on my own. I had learned that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else. But did that mean I couldn't have both? Could I have a love that was built on respect, trust, and growth? The decision. That night, as I sat in the quiet of our home, I thought about everything we had been through. The heartbreak, the growth, the challenges. I thought about the woman I was now, the one who no longer needed validation from anyone, the one who knew her worth. And I thought about Chris, the man who had hurt me, but also the one who had grown with me, who had shown me a different kind of love. I wasn't sure if that love was enough to heal the wounds of the past, but I was ready to find out. The next morning, I met him in the kitchen, and we sat down together. The weight of the decision was still heavy on my shoulders, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a new beginning. "Chris," I said, my voice steady, "I've been thinking, and I've realized that I want to try again. But this time, we do it differently. We do it with respect for each other's growth, with patience and understanding." His face softened, relief flooding his expression. I'm ready for that, he said quietly. I'm ready to build something that's truly ours. No pretending. Just us. And with that, I knew that the road ahead would still have its challenges. But this time, we would face them together, as two people who had learned to love themselves first, before learning to love each other. A new kind of love. The decision had been made. Chris and I had both agreed to start anew, but this time with different intentions. We weren't trying to recreate the past. We were determined to build something stronger, healthier, and more real than what we had before. In the weeks that followed, our conversations became deeper, more honest. We no longer tried to hide from our pain, our mistakes. We faced them head-on, talking through the tough moments, and learning to understand each other in a way we never had before. I had learned to express my needs, my desires, without fear of being judged or misunderstood. Chris, too, had become more open, more vulnerable. He had begun to see the importance of respecting my boundaries, of being patient with my process. It wasn't always easy. There were still days when the weight of the past felt like a shadow we couldn't shake off. And there were moments when we both wondered if we had truly healed or if we were just pretending for the sake of the relationship. But the difference now was that we were both committed to doing the hard work. We were willing to fight for each other, even if that meant going through the uncomfortable, messy process of healing. Rediscovering ourselves. As I grew more comfortable with the changes in my relationship, I realized that I had also begun rediscovering parts of myself that I had buried for years. I had spent so much time focused on Chris, on our relationship, that I had lost touch with my own passions, my own dreams. I began taking small steps to reconnect with myself. I started painting again, something I had loved to do before life became so chaotic. I signed up for yoga classes, allowing myself the space to breathe and relax, to focus on my own well-being. I also began to travel more, to explore the world around me without feeling like I needed anyone else to define my happiness. One weekend, I took a solo trip to a small town by the coast. I spent my days walking along the beach, watching the waves crash against the shore, feeling the cool wind against my face. It was the first time in months that I truly felt at peace, alone with my thoughts, free from the worries of the past and the uncertainty of the future. During that trip, I had a conversation with myself that would change everything. I realized that I had spent so much of my life looking for someone else to complete me, to fill the empty spaces inside me. But what I had found was that those spaces weren't empty. They were full of potential, of strength, of possibilities. I didn't need someone else to make me whole. I was already whole. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The struggles of rebuilding. When I returned from my trip, I felt different. I had learned something invaluable about myself, something that I knew would change the way I approached my relationship with Chris. But rebuilding a relationship takes time, and we still had our struggles. There were days when old habits crept back in, when Chris would forget the promises he had made, or when I would retreat into myself, unable to express the pain I was feeling. I had to remind myself that this wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. It was about growing together, making mistakes, and learning from them. One evening, after a particularly tense conversation, I found myself standing by the window, looking out at the city below. The lights twinkled in the distance, but the world felt quiet and still. Chris came up behind me, his hand resting gently on my shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice full of regret. "I know I've been falling short, and I'm sorry." I turned around to face him, my eyes searching his. "I'm sorry too," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I've been pulling away. I've been so afraid of getting hurt again, that I forgot how to trust." Chris nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "I know. And I'm going to keep working on showing you that you can trust me. But it's going to take time." I smiled faintly. "I know. And I'm willing to give it that time." I just need you to be patient with me." And that was when I realized something. We were no longer the people we had been when we first met. We had both changed, grown, and evolved. But that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It was just different. Our love wasn't the same as it had been. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was even better. The road ahead. As the months continued to pass, Chris and I grew closer, but in a way that was healthier and more sustainable. We had learned how to communicate better, how to express our needs and desires without fear or hesitation. We no longer tried to change each other. Instead, we accepted each other for who we were. I was learning to love him, not for the man I thought he should be, but for the man he was becoming. And he was learning to love me, not for the woman I had been, but for the woman I was becoming. There were still moments of uncertainty, moments when we questioned if we were doing the right thing, if we were truly on the path to happiness. But we had learned that the answers weren't always clear. Sometimes, you just had to keep moving forward, even if you didn't know what the future held. I had learned that love wasn't about perfection, but about the willingness to show up, to be vulnerable, to grow together. And that was the kind of love Chris and I had found. A new chapter. One evening, as we sat together on the porch, Chris turned to me with a serious expression. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice full of purpose. "I want to ask you something. Something important." I looked at him, my heart beating faster, wondering what he was going to say. "Emily," he continued, "will you marry me?" The question hung in the air, more profound than I had ever imagined. I looked at Chris, his eyes filled with hope and sincerity, and in that moment, I realized how far we had come. "Yes," I said, my voice full of emotion. "Yes, I will." Epilogue: the future. Our wedding was small, intimate, filled with love and laughter. We didn't need a grand ceremony to make our commitment to each other real. What mattered was the journey we had shared, the lessons we had learned, and the love we had built. In the years that followed, we faced new challenges, new joys, but we always faced them together. We had built something that wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. The final chapter, a new beginning. As time flowed gently, the life Chris and I had built together continued to unfold with a quiet sense of peace. There were no grand, dramatic moments. There were no sudden shifts that jolted us awake. Instead, there was the steady rhythm of two people learning how to live alongside each other, supporting, growing, and evolving. I had learned that love wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't always about passionate promises or sweeping gestures. It was about being there in the small, quiet moments. The mornings when we made coffee together. The evenings when we shared our thoughts after a long day. The moments when we held each other without needing to say a word. Those were the moments that made our love real. We didn't need to fix each other anymore. We had come to understand that we were already whole. We didn't need the past to define us. We were creating a future, one that was ours to shape and navigate. There were still times when we found ourselves slipping into old habits, a hurtful word, a moment of doubt. But we had learned to forgive quickly, to ask for what we needed, to listen with an open heart. I had come to realize that forgiveness, true forgiveness, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting that the past had shaped us, but it didn't have to dictate our future. The quiet peace. One afternoon, as we sat together in the park, watching the children play nearby, I leaned my head on Chris's shoulder, feeling the warmth of his presence. "You know," I said softly, "life isn't always what we expect, but sometimes, it's better that way." Chris smiled, his hand gently squeezing mine. I couldn't agree more. We didn't need words to fill the silence anymore. We had learned to be present with each other, to simply exist in the same space, with no expectation other than to be there for one another. I looked at him, really looked at him, And I saw not just the man who had hurt me, but the man who had worked tirelessly to rebuild, to grow, and to love. I saw the person who, through every struggle, had never given up on us. And in that moment, I knew that the journey wasn't over. It would never truly be over. But the next chapter would be ours to write together, with each new page a reflection of the love and lessons we had learned along the way. A future without fear. Years passed, and with each passing year, our love deepened. We built a family. We built careers. We built a life that was rooted in trust, respect, and most of all, love. The house we had started in was no longer our home, but we carried the lessons we learned there with us. The lessons of patience, of vulnerability, of acceptance. We had grown, but we had never stopped growing together. And now, as we sat on our front porch on a quiet evening, with the sun setting behind the hills and the world slowing down around us, I realized that this peaceful, contented life was everything I had ever wanted, not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. Chris turned to me, his face soft in the golden light. "I love you," he said, his voice steady, but filled with the same emotion that had always been there. "I love you too," I whispered back, my heart full, knowing that our journey, our love, had come full circle. We had reached the end of one chapter, but the beauty was in the beginning of the next. We didn't know what the future held, but we had learned that it didn't matter. As long as we had each other, the future would be bright, and that, in the end, was enough. If you like this story, don't forget to follow my channel.